Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome. I am Nicole Cagna, and this is Ask the Prophet. We are live today. We are at our home studio, so I'm excited to be here with you today. And I just wanted to let you know that our topic is a continuation of something that we have that's a series. And this series is actually called Things That I Wish was talking or I wish was talked about at the pulpit that isn't, sins that are typically not talked about, or topics that are kind of avoided at the pulpit. And so one of them happened to be gluttony. And so gluttony is one of those sins that we typically don't talk about. We talk about other forms of addiction very readily. We talk about alcohol addiction, we talk about drug addiction, we talk about focusing on the Lord. We talk about some of these things that we need to concentrate on. Sometimes we even will talk about social media, and say, we need to like do that a lot less and things like that. But very rarely do we as a church touch on food. And I think the reason why is because a lot of times as a church, our events are centered around food, and we're kind of complicit in that. And so we kind of normalize gluttony at potluck dinners, and we kind of normalize eating poorly in America on holidays. We normalize as mothers needing a break and needing that treat at night, right, and having that ice cream at night that we talked about because we're exhausted. So food in not just our culture as Americans, but our food as culture as even a church is one of those things that we typically are complicit in. So we will say, hey, y'all need to lessen your social media. Hey, y'all need to lessen this or that. But we will then say, hey, we're going to have an ice cream social, or hey, we're having a dessert table or a bake off or whatever it is, kind of fundraiser where it's okay to overeat. We have Thanksgiving and we say, wear your stretchy pants, and we joke around because there's an anticipation that you are going to overeat. And so we kind of normalize it and joke around about it. We kind of say, hey, once the kids are in bed, out come the Oreos, out come the ice cream, out come some of those things that we tend to eat, and to say we're rewarding ourselves. We do this with our children. Oh, if you get an A, or if something's wrong, or if you have a bad dream or whatever it is, hey, do you want milk and cookies? Or hey, you got a bad grade or you're upset, hey, come on, let's normalize eating junk food, let's go out for ice cream. So what we were talking about in the first two sessions, session 1 and 2, is we were talking about gluttony spiritually, and we were also talking about it physically. And we were talking about what it does to the body. And we were talking about how we need to discuss this a lot more. But did you ever look at gluttony as something that could possibly be generational? Or have you ever looked at gluttony as something that could be a reason for trauma? Probably not. And the reason why is because this is the deep aspect of gluttony that we typically don't understand. We don't understand why we have it. Good morning, Vicky. Good morning. We don't understand why we struggle. We don't understand. So that's why we are discussing part 3. We are getting into generational reasons, and we are also getting into trauma response. So just as an overview, generationally, typically I talk about that as culture. And I remember growing up in an Italian family. My nonna was from Italy. She had blonde hair, blue eyes, northern Italy. And my grandfather was, dark hair, more tan skin. And they watched their weight. They were not overweight people at all by any means. But the way that my build was is I took after my dad. And so as a result, I was kind of longer and a lot more lean than my Italian counterparts. My mother's side is very tiny, and my dad's side is kind of long, tall, and lean. And so I always kind of had that slender sort of, they used to joke around, say you're like a zipper, because just like straight up and down. When I was a kid, I was lanky, I was taller than everybody else. And so I always used to get pinched. Oh, mangiare, mangiare, mangiare. You gotta eat. You're too skinny. My nonna would say, "Ah, Baba, you're too skinny. You told her she pinched. You don't eat enough. You look like you're gonna float away." Like I was a balloon or something. But cultural, we don't realize that a lot of times if you don't finish what's on your plate, that's an insult. So in certain cultures, if you don't eat and if you don't have seconds, that's an insult. So you almost have to stuff yourselves, and that's when Italians are happy. Is when you actually just eat until you can't eat anymore. And also being the only girl in an Italian family, growing up around males, male cousins, like, they ate. I mean, they ate, and of course that made all the mamas feel good because that they were always hungry, they were always having seconds and thirds. But me, I could barely finish what was on my plate. Even at lunch, growing up, I used to give half the food away because I was like, this is enough to feed an army. If I were to eat the way that things were packed for me, I probably would weigh 3 times the amount that I weigh now. But for me, I always just ate until I was, satisfied. And what we have done in this country and even culturally is we eat until we're full. And that's different. And I'm teaching my son this as well, because boys and kids in general, they are more sedentary than ever before. And you are starting to see kids that have juvenile diabetes that are severely overweight, and they should not be, because they are sedentary and because they are allowed to eat whatever they want. We don't put limitations on our kids. And so one of the things that we do at home is, if when my son comes home, he is like ravenous, and most kids are, but I will say, he's like, can I have A, B, and C? He wants all 3 things. He wants a banana, he wants chips, he wants something else, another snack. I said, no, you could pick one of those 3 things, but you cannot have all of those 3 things. It is 4 o'clock. We eat dinner in 2 hours. You can have a snack, not 3 snacks that are like a meal, because you might be hungry, but if you measure whether or not you're full, if that's your measure of satiety, meaning if you are measuring how satisfied you are based on how full you are, you will set yourself up for failure. And the reason why that is because we are supposed to eat enough to be satisfied. Taste and see. Taste and see, right? We are not supposed to eat enough until we want to throw up, or until we're so full, until we're like, oh, uncomfortable. And so one of the things that we have to do, even as parents for our children, is set limitations for what they eat, how much they eat, and when they eat. If we do not do that, we are going to end up, which is what we have in our country, in America, is an epidemic of kids that are diabetic, that are severely overweight, that can't even run or play or ride bikes anymore. They're just in front of the television, they're in front of their iPad, they're in front of their phones, all of that. So part of understanding gluttony is understanding that it could be generational. It could be in your family line. It could be, if your family passed down certain recipes, even, and all of that. And so, and I remember for me, when I had dietary restrictions, it was like, to not be able to have real cheese. It was like, oh, you're Italian. It's like blasphemy, right? So, I had to rethink my whole life. I had to rethink my culture. I had to start to learn how to make food based upon my food sensitivities and my son's food sensitivities. And it was a whole new way of thinking. And that is really what stops people from changing their diet. If you change your diet, you'll change your life. And a lot of times people are like, well, I just don't have time. Welcome, Lisa. How are you, sis? A lot of people, they're like, I don't have time to change, but you do. But you do. Because what you don't have time to do is go to the doctor. What you don't have time to do is pay thousands of dollars in medications, copays, and insulin and other things simply because you won't change your diet. So you can't afford to not change your diet. See, because you were bought with a price. I don't know why we don't preach this, but we preach this in every other way. We're like, oh, no sexual sin. You were bought with a price. Well, guess what? When you're eating a whole carton of ice cream, I want you to tell yourself that too. You were bought with a price. What are you putting in your temple? Why are you putting it there? What need is it filling? Because we know that it's not filling a need for nutrition. When we eat junk, what need are you filling? What void is it that you have that you are trying to put something that you're trying to cushion. Rokaterabashande, roshaterabasi. I feel the fire of God. I was praying this morning. I was praying this morning over this message because I'm like, Lord, I know you want people to hear this. This person asked this question, and the Lord was like, I want like a 3 to 4 to 5 part series on this because this is a major issue. Listen, what would happen if the world goes into famine? What happens if we experience famine? What happens if we experience a time where there's some deprivation and we're so spoiled and we're so used to just eating and eating? We don't fast. Now listen, I'm not, trying to get religious on you. Please hear me. I'm not that person. If you know me, I'm not that person. Look at me. I'm not that person. Okay. But I'm here to tell you that we damage ourselves. We sabotage ourselves with food and we don't even realize it. We are a vessel, we are a temple. And my goodness, it matters. Your health matters. Listen, when you wake up in the morning and your feet hit the ground and you just feel the weight of the world on your shoulders, not just spiritually, but physically, and you're like, oh, things hurt. Things hurt when you eat foods that aren't healthy. And this has nothing just to do with weight, because I have seen people that are rail thin and they're drinking, sodas and eating junk food. So please understand that gluttony, sometimes we think of gluttony and we think of just weight. That's not true. There are people that can have an issue with gluttony. And even if they are not showing the weight, they are still damaging their body with the type of food that they eat. Come on, right, Natasha? Come on, y'all. Listen, we can't play anymore. We can't play anymore. We are vessels. We have to be in good health. And I can tell you that there have been so many ministers that I have seen, and it's broken my heart that I have seen ministers die before their time, heart attacks, severely overweight and having a heart attack and having surgeries and being sick, all because of food. All because of food. Food is not worth your life. It's not worth your death. It's not. So one of the ways that gluttony gets in, sometimes we're like, well, where did this stem from? There was something that happened, and usually it has to do with culture. Okay, because culture plays a significant role in shaping behaviors, attitudes around food, especially. Okay, so I showed you and shared with you growing up. I mean, being Italian, kids had peanut butter jelly sandwiches. I'm rolling in with like a piece of lasagna set for a man, like a man portion. I call it the man size portion, and I'm over here like they're packing dessert and other, and I'm grateful that I had home cooked meals, and I'm really grateful for that. But I did have to give a lot of food away because I simply could not eat it all. And so sometimes there's celebratory feasting even in certain cultures, like holidays, Christmas, right? In Italian, on Christmas Eve, you have the fishes, right? The 7 fishes, and so you eat, different fishes. That's probably the people would think it would be healthy, but you have calamare, which is fried squid. So you have all different kinds of Italian dishes that are fried and things like that, that at least for me, that I can't eat. And so sometimes it has to be part of that. Right. We talked about Thanksgiving, people wearing I call it the Thanksgiving pants. The thing that I'm grateful for with Thanksgiving is a lot of times when you have food allergies, you're the one who has to host everything. And so as a result, because I'm so busy cooking it, by the time I eat it, I don't eat that much. It's just the way that it is, because when you're tasting and you're cooking, you just don't, you almost lose the flavor for the food that you make. I'm sure a lot of women and men who are chefs and good cooks could attest to that. And because I've seen on both sides where they don't eat as much if you're cooking it. So Then there's the other thing, like social norms and peer pressure as well, and that has to do with portion sizes. And I want to be clear on portion sizes because that's a big one in Italian households, Hispanic households. The food is like a symbol of generosity. So it's like mange, eat, and they're just, oh no, I'm full, and then no, and you're serving more, and a person feels like if they don't eat it that they're being rude, but then they eat it and they make themselves sick. And sometimes we just have to say, you know what, I loved this was so amazing, but I am so full and I just don't want to waste this. And so you have to kind of put up a hard boundary, even culturally. And when it would be insulting, it's I would rather insult somebody than make myself sick. And sometimes we don't realize that there are boundaries, that we have a right to set regarding our own body. I always find it intriguing that everybody's like, oh, my body, my choice. And I'm just like, yeah, except for the fact that when you can't say no, to your family, or you can't say no to pressure, then really is it really your body? Because you're giving it away. You're giving the power to somebody else to force you to eat something that you don't want to eat. That's gluttonous behavior. So why is it that there are other things that you feel you have a right to choose, but yet somehow food you don't? So I find that's intriguing, that you can't say no to family, that you can't say no. That's a problem. Even hosts can play into this. And listen, I'm not going to lie, when I have company, I cook. And I cook and I make things, but we always have leftovers, and I certainly don't force people to have seconds, but I offer it, and that's okay. But my point is that you are allowed to say no. You do not have to contribute to gluttony by embarking on and coming into agreement with a mindset that associates generosity with overeating. You see, you don't have to come into agreement with that, and you shouldn't. And so we know, that culture plays a part of that. Maybe you grew up even and you were told this: you better eat everything on your plate. And if you don't eat everything on your plate, you're going to be punished, or you're going to see it the next morning. Now, there's a difference between saying if you don't eat with dinner, you don't have dessert. That's what we used to say. So when my son was younger and he didn't like vegetables, who does really when they're younger? And he's like, I'm not eating vegetables. I'd say then you're not getting dessert. And you could just not get anything that has any sugar in it at all, because until you learn how to eat what's good for your body, I'm not going to allow you to put what's bad for your body in it. So, and of course sugar in moderation is okay, but I was teaching him, and there were times where that boy sat at that table for 2 hours. He's strong-willed. He sat there for 2 hours. I sat there right with him, because this was a hill that I was willing, there's hills that you're willing to like die on. That was a hill that I was willing to stand my ground on. I'm like, yeah, no, we're not playing. Because if I let you know that it's easier for me to not to give in, then I'm teaching you that you can wear me down, but you can't. And so I sat there and I was like, we would go on about our day, and he'd sit there and the vegetables would get colder and colder. And finally he would eat it. And then we'd look at the time and I'd say, I'm sorry, but you don't have time for dessert. Your bedtime is 7:30. So now you missed out on eating the rest of your dinner, because he would leave it on purpose to try to, make it like, so, because he was hoping that we would just say, go ahead, just eat the chicken, that we would get tired. But instead I'm like, oh, now you're missing out on your dinner and dessert. I'm sorry. That took one time. All of a sudden, he started eating those vegetables. "Can I get a little salt?" He'd say. "Can I get some seasoning?" And he'd eat them. Because you have to listen, it's not easy, but you have to train up a child. You have to train them up. You have to train them up of what's good for their body. You cannot allow them to dictate what they no kid is gonna love vegetables. Maybe some do, but most that I've met never just, like, woke up and said, "Hey, can I have a broccoli?" or a carrot, nobody. I used to have to be forced to eat veggies, and my parents did the same thing. They'd be Brussels sprouts. I'd be praying. I'd be like, Jesus, can you make these Brussels sprouts turn into ice cream? I remember praying. I was little. Can you make it turn into something better? And Jesus would be like, you got to eat it. He'd be like, hold your breath. I did. I followed what Jesus told me to do at a young age. And I did. And I told my son the same thing. Just, eat it. It's good for you. And what we're training our children when we do that is we're letting them know that sometimes the things that are good for you are things that you don't want to do. And in life, there's things that you don't want to do, like exercise, that are good for you. And if you can train yourself to do the hard thing, to do the thing like exercise or do the thing like eat vegetables, do the thing that you don't want to do, you'll avoid things that you do want to avoid, like sickness and being severely overweight, being having chronic inflammation in your body. Some people aren't even overweight. They just look a certain way because they're carrying inflammation from the way that they're eating. They're just carrying it. And inflammation packs on pounds. It has absolutely nothing to do with their food intake, because once you get rid of inflammation, you'll a person will look like they lost weight. And the scale won't show any difference, but they'll look more lean, and you're wondering why. It's because their body isn't in a chronic state of inflammation, fighting itself, fighting just to survive. Because the chronic inflammatory substances are things like white sugar, white flour, ultra processed foods. If you go in the grocery store, you will not be able to. I could tell you, when I got awakened to what the food industry puts into places, I could not believe that in a grocery store, you would be hard pressed to find 25% real food. Hard pressed to find one quarter of it as real food, because it's not. And so sometimes, even culturally, there is a lack of awareness about nutrition, right? And so sometimes there's cultural things that have high calories and low nutritional value, like lasagna. I love lasagna, but if you're using the white flour and the white, if you're not making it with fresh tomatoes, if you're not making it with the homemade pasta, the way that it was made, and you're buying a lasagna that is ultra processed, that's not the same. Or if you're just eating everything that has cheese and white pasta and thinking that that's somehow going to be nutritional, it's not. That's the In Italy, they really don't eat like that. In American Italia, that's how it's looked at. There's pizza and lasagna and manigot and all of those things. But that's not when I went to Italy, they're in shape, and because they walk everywhere and they eat very differently than we do in the United States. Even their main meal is in the mid-afternoon and during siesta. So there's a where you sit with family and you eat your larger meal in the later afternoon. And then at your quote unquote dinner is very light fare, just as breakfast is. It's not the same. Okay. And so we have to understand that we're not eating like the Europeans when we're eating ultra processed American food that is trying to pass as cultural food, right? It's like saying the Olive Garden is real Italian food, and it's not. And that's like saying Taco Bell is real Spanish food. It's not. It is not at all. I've eaten in the Dominican Republic, and I'm telling you, there's some good food, like real food in other countries. So sometimes it's a lack of awareness about nutrition, about serving sizes. Sometimes, even generationally, it can have an emotional association. So, cultural traditions or family traditions can actually associate food with comfort, joy, or emotional well being. And so now all of a sudden you're finding that there's an emotional connection, and that can lead to overeating because individuals are seeking solace, happiness through food or through tradition. And then that contributes to this mindset that associates positive emotions with excessive consumption. So now you're associating happiness. And listen, sometimes you try to recreate a memory, right? With a family member, like, oh, dad and I always used to have this kind of ice cream on this kind of day, and we would do this, and that. But then all of a sudden now you're doing that all the time. And it's not a treat anymore. Now it's a habit. And that's where addiction comes in. That's where gluttony loves to thrive. It likes to attach itself to emotional wounds, emotional associations, and also trauma. So I want to talk to you about gluttony as a shield for trauma. And this happens especially with people that have experienced sexual abuse or emotional distress. And so it's a form in reality of emotional eating where people will use food to manage or suppress difficult emotions. So I remember there was a young girl when she was 12 years old. She was being, I was 12 as well, and she confided in me that there was sexual abuse in her household by a family member towards her. And she was severely overweight. And I remember she opened up about it to me, and she would eat, she said, as a way of trying to keep him away from her, as a way of insulating her body from what was happening to it. And she thought that if she was overweight, and she believed that if she was overweight, that maybe, just maybe, he would stop touching her, but he didn't. And all she was doing was killing herself in order to get away because she was a victim. So sometimes gluttony is used to shield, especially if it's a girl. She'll try to use it to make herself less attractive. And gluttony is used, see, it's not just how a woman dresses or a young girl dresses. So we all experience, especially women, I would say mostly, experience a lot of trauma going through puberty and going through different things, and the way that young boys are not taught how to. Young women are taught how to, not make your brother stumble, but nobody teaches boys how to not look with lust. I think that if both, were taught equally, then you might have boys walking around with one eye plucked out, like Jesus said, but I digress. My point is that a lot of times a girl, when she's uncomfortable in her body because she's transitioning from a young girl into womanhood, will be usually shocked and dismayed at the kind of male attention that she's getting. And so sometimes because she's uncomfortable, she'll try to insulate herself. So sometimes it's not just sexual abuse. Sometimes it's just being uncomfortable in your own body, in your what it looks like, and what it's turning into, and you want to remain a young girl. I remember for me, starting to mature at age 11. That was horrible for me because the way I looked like I was 15, and I did not contribute to that. That was just the way I was built and made. And, I didn't wear makeup or anything, but it's just I looked more mature. And so no matter what I did, what kind of baggy shirts, what kind of long skirts, anything I tried to do to cover myself because I was uncomfortable in my own physique, my own physical nature didn't work. So for me, I didn't use food, but I used clothing because I was uncomfortable. And not that any harassment stopped because it didn't matter. But my point was that I just felt uncomfortable. And so gluttony could be used as a shield for trauma. And I do agree, absolutely, that is important to have balance. But we also have to know that if gluttony is as a result of trauma, then you do need inner healing and deliverance. If it's a generational curse, I want you to break it. You will need to break that off because there's always then going to be something that you're going to block yourself. And so comfort eating is a shield for trauma. Okay. So sometimes this could happen if, your parents may be separated or divorced or something traumatic happened. And, you come home and you look forward to a certain snack because there's comfort and familiarity, especially if individuals associate, certain foods with memories or positive emotions. Women can tend to turn to comfort foods as a way to self soothe during distressing times. So there's a lot of ways that we use food to insulate. The other thing is emotional numbing. I remember a young girl. She was very, 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 very skinny, and she was bulimic. And she said, "I'm a glutton." And I remember being shocked because she was so skinny, and she says, "I binge eat." She said, "And then I throw it all up." And so I eat, and I don't even taste the food. She goes, "But I just do it to numb myself." So that's another way. Gluttony is a shield for trauma. It's emotional numbing. So it's not just comfort eating associated with memory. Sometimes a person will just eat and eat and eat and eat and just grab. That's like that spirit. It's a spirit. It will overtake you, and you will just find yourself just consuming whatever is in your path and then getting sick. And she said that she did that because she was assaulted. And there was when you're assaulted, a lot of times food and food restriction and food control becomes the epicenter in your brain of control, because you can control your portions. You can't control what happened to you. You can't control the assault, but you can control what you ingest, and you can control what you eliminate. And so a lot of times that kind of gluttony is associated with trauma because it's associated with emotional numbing. See, I want you to understand that gluttony is not just somebody craving McDonald's for the sake of it, that there are all different ways that this slippery sin gets in people's lives. But this is not for condemnation. This is to say, pay attention to your thought processes and your mindsets about food, because it matters. What you believe about food, and I know that Natasha mentioned even, pierogi and potato salads and things that are rich and starchy. Those are things that are filling, and those are things that taste good. So we have that cultural aspect. But don't forget that there also is trauma sometimes attached. So we always want to have compassion, because you really don't know why somebody eats the way that they do. Maybe it's something that they grew up like every Sunday, they grew up with a, certain type of family dinner with fried chicken and bacon and things that probably could clog your arteries in one sitting. But that's the kind of comfort food that reminds them of their heritage, that reminds them of their parents. And so now all of a sudden they're going to eat like that. But the thing is that we're supposed to do better when we know better. And we're not supposed to fall in gluttonous patterns just because it's the way it's always been generationally. And we're not supposed to do that just because we're sabotaging ourselves. Gluttony is a sin against your own body. That's really what it is. You are sinning against the body that God gave you. You are doing that. We always talk about sins that make you sin against your own body. And typically, masturbation and sexual sin is always mentioned as a sin against your own body, right? However, and even homosexuality, a lot of times that, we hear that preached to the pulpit, it's a sin against your own body. Premarital sex, it's a sin against your own body. But do you know that gluttony, that is the same thing, but it's not mentioned because it's an acceptable sin. Also, that goes along with emotional numbing is that compulsive eating that we were just talking about. And that is a control issue, and that comes from trauma. Sometimes rather than like, if you've ever seen, we talk about this with, we mentioned it briefly in our last show, but I wanna bring it back to your attention, how we normalize it, especially with women. We normalize it by making jokes that when the kids go to bed, that's when the glasses of wine and all the the sugar cookies come out, or, when we talk about how when when a woman experiences a breakup, another girlfriend comes over with, pints of ice cream, Malamars, Oreo cookies. And I'm thinking, why is it acceptable that we send this message out to young women that when she is broken up with or experiences a breakup or her boyfriend cheats, that somehow the acceptable thing to do is to sabotage her own health? because of heartbreak. And we normalize this with women. We normalize sabotaging our bodies. What if after a breakup, instead, you focus on self improvement and say, you know what, I'm going to process through the emotions. I'm not going to numb it by eating junk food. I'm going to process through what's hard and what hurts. And I'm going to see what I could learn from it. And I'm going to keep up my exercise because there's no relationship on earth that can get me to stop taking care of myself. What if we normalized that? What if we normalized for moms self care? Self care includes exercise. And no, I'm sorry, you shouldn't have to wait until your child is 3 or 5 years old in order to take care of yourself. Do you have a spouse? If you have a spouse, they are fully capable of actually parenting. So we need to stop these myths that somehow, as moms, the world is going to fall apart if you take an hour to an hour and a half for yourself and actually do something that will make you into a healthier version of a mother and a wife and a human being. Because before you're a mom, before you're a wife, before you're any of those things, you're the daughter of the king. He made you. You're made in his image and nobody else's. So your job is to take care of yourself. And I don't know why we normalize being sick. I don't know why we normalize being absolutely just completely worn out and we celebrate it. Oh, I'm just so tired. I'm so tired. I'm so tired. I'm like, okay, I get it. We're tired, but work out. Take time. Take time to heal. Take time to physically do that. Make time. We need to stop. It is not a flex to be so busy, right? And yes, it does take two, 100%, Glenn. That my husband and I have always said that. My husband stayed in shape in my son's younger years. He asked, he's like, "Babe, I would love to play softball on the softball team, but I know that that means 2 nights a week I'll be out. What do you say? Like, what is your opinion? Like, what do you I want your not permission, but I want to know that, are you okay with that?" And I said, "Yeah, of course. Go have fun." And he knew that in the mornings at 5:30, when my little guy was super little, I'd get up and I'd go to Gold's Gym when we lived in New York, and I would do the swim classing and I'd work out, and he would be on morning duty. And in the evenings at 6 o'clock, he had practice. And we sacrificed for each other. We built that in so it was equitable. And our son saw that dad had softball. Oh my goodness, a life outside of the house. And guess what? Guess what? We normalized mom having a life outside of the house too. It takes two. You need to have that. So stop being a martyr. Husbands have to be healthy too. They have to work out. Let's not normalize the dad bod. They always joke around the dad bod is in. And I'm like, why is being out of shape for fathers in? Make time for fathers to work out. Make time for mothers to work out. Make time for each other to exercise. It does take two. That's the whole purpose of a marriage, right? And absolutely, Vicky, eating disorders are a symptom of gluttony. They are a symptom. But I want to be clear that this is not the condemnation part, meaning it's not like you're a glutton because you have an eating disorder. No, it's like, okay, gluttony is the addiction. It is a response to the trauma that you've experienced. So the key is heal the wound, get rid of the trauma, get rid of the symptom, which is gluttony. Rokatse. That's important to understand. See, we can't allow this to continue without talking about the reality. Do you know that some people will use food as self sabotage and punishment, especially if they harbor feelings of guilt or shame related to the traumatic experience? I have seen this when young Boys and girls have been sexually abused by a spiritual leader or by a teacher or by somebody in a position of authority, like a youth pastor or somebody at camp, like that kind of scenario where it was supposed to be a safe place. And so sometimes there's that self punishment that if you see a young boy who's extremely overweight, it's because they are trying to block that person from touching them or they are deliberately trying to harm themselves. These are people who are aware that they are actively harming themselves, but they feel like they can't stop. So, overeating and consuming unhealthy foods, that's a way for them to express their negative emotions. And we also see it in body image and weight control because trauma impacts body image. And so a lot of times that's the other thing. Let's say that somebody was relentlessly bullied. It can go the opposite way. If somebody was relentlessly bullied for being overweight, there can be deprivation, anorexia, deprivation. It's still food related trauma. It's still using a lack of food to prevent that being made fun of. There's body dysmorphia where somebody, a young man or woman will look at each other, and men have anorexia too. So I want to make that clear. This is not just a female issue. There are many men who struggle with that as well. They look at themselves and they feel like they're not attractive. And so they try to control their food intake, thinking, if I just get skinnier, if I just get thinner, then girls will like me more. Or maybe somebody will stop making fun of me for being overweight or my body type. And women go through it too. So even food as a method of being, food is your God, but you're deciding to deprive yourself of eating it and you're slowly killing yourself because you're believing, coming into agreement with a lie. And there is a spiritual aspect involved because you will physically see yourself. Listen, I have ministered to people who are anorexic. I've done inner healing and deliverance, and I am telling you, it is a spirit. Because when they look in the mirror, they will actually physically see the dysmorphic version of their body. They will see themselves as overweight, even if they weigh 80 pounds. That's a spirit. That's a spirit because it alters your perspective. It alters your perspective. Understand that. We don't ever really know what somebody is going through. We don't know the reason why. Also, we have to understand that sometimes people want to avoid processing emotionally, and they know it. So they're going to avoid underlying trauma, and eating then can become a distraction from addressing root causes of emotional pain. So let's say that when you would struggle at home, maybe you were bullied when you were little, or you would encounter things. And so you would have lunch by yourself because you had shame. You were afraid of people looking at you eat. Sometimes if people struggle with body image, they can't even eat in a public setting. They have to eat in closets. People with eating disorders, you'll notice that they will eat in closets or in a pantry and they'll wolf like 5 cookies down and then come out because they don't want anybody to see them eating. That's trauma related. When you hide food, now listen, sometimes we got to hide it from our kids. Sometimes you have a snack, a Snickers bar that you don't want to share. Let's just be real. Sometimes there's a snack and you know how kids are. You open something up, they can I have it? Can I taste it? Want? Or if they're 2 or 3, I want, right? So sometimes you trying to I just have like a brief bite of lunch. That's a little bit different. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about there are people that will actually hide themselves and suppress. Absolutely. Yes. Suppress through eating. And that's important because people don't understand how much they do that. Had a hard day, have some chocolate. Listen, and the media, they know that. So that's why you're going to get the Mickey D's and the BK, have it your way. I don't think so. If I have it my way, I'm going to be fit. I'm going to be in shape. I'm going to do whatever it takes. I will not let my body shape define me, but I will not let my illness limit me. I refuse to let trauma. No, You have to wake up and choose yourself every single day. You have to look at yourself in the mirror sometimes, and you have to say, this body, if you're a woman, you would say, this body produced life. Yeah, I have scars, but so does Jesus, because I sacrificed my body to bring forth life into this world, just like Jesus. See, women are made in his image too, and we know sacrifice because he bears the scars still in heaven, and we on our bodies bear the scars of childhood. There are army veterans that are men that bear the scars and shrapnel and bullet wounds of what they endured. Our scars tell a story, but every day you got to get up and choose your mental health. Every day you got to get up and choose you. It can't be everybody else. You're no good to anybody else if you're not taking care of yourself. Yes, you have to exercise. I want to explain something to you. I am not saying this as somebody who is, oh, this is just so easy. I am somebody who lives with chronic pain. I want you to understand what I'm telling you. It would be easy for me to sit back and play a violin for myself. It'd be easy. There are days where I wake up and I'm like, oh, now listen, the kind of exercise I do is gentle because I am not trying to break my body apart. That's the other thing. See, gluttony can come in all these different forms. Whatever you overindulge in is gluttonous. So you can have actually an addiction even to exercise. So please understand everything in moderation. There are people that beat up their bodies to look a certain way. God doesn't want you to do that either. He doesn't want you to give up, but he also doesn't want you to give out. So we have to live healthy mind, body, spirit, soul. And sometimes our bodies, listen, you have to understand your bodies keep the score of the trauma that you endured. Your body will keep the score. And sometimes gluttony is a way of self soothing or over exercising. Or sometimes you can fall into a depression and you don't want to get out of bed. And sometimes the only thing making you get out of bed is the idea of a sugary breakfast. Sometimes the thing that gets you to lunch is knowing that you could have Chipotle with somebody and overeat with another friend who's going to eat just like you do. When you begin to look forward to only parts of your day that have to do with food, you are developing an addiction. And here's the other thing. For some individuals, I want you to understand that gluttony is because there's an association of food with safety. This is also trauma. So it's not just over exercise or under exercise or overeating or under eating. I want you to understand that gluttony can also occur if you grew up in poverty. Sometimes your basic needs were not met. I'll notice this with people, people in the military. A lot of times they don't have a lot of time to eat. So they develop a habit of eating extremely fast because they never know when they're going to get to eat again if they are in a chronic mindset of war. And so sometimes that PTSD can kick in and you'll eat fast because as a warrior and as somebody who always has to be on the move and fight or flight, you're training your body to eat fast. Your brain doesn't have the signal to say that you're full. And before that happens, you're eating a second dish of something. Sometimes it could be because you never knew one week there'd be food in the house. And the next week your parents would go on a bender and now there's no groceries. And so as a result, you learn to, whenever there was food, to overeat because you never knew when your next meal was coming from. See, poverty does that. Food could be associated with safety. That's trauma. So if trauma is related to a lack of basic needs being met, food can be associated with security. In times of distress, that'll happen as well. So the reason why I'm talking to you about this today is because I know that the Lord wants you guys to be delivered, but he also wants you guys to understand the reason why. Because it's difficult to be delivered from something when you don't know the root cause. See, the root is always the part of the inner healing. That's why I strongly believe in inner healing and deliverance. To me, deliverance is a byproduct of dealing with trauma. Because when you start to poke at the wound, the spirit or the demon or the thing will manifest. It happens every time. This is a way of saying that, guess what? The spirit and the demon, you ain't the main event. It's not the main event. So they don't get to show off. We focus on healing the wound. Then that thing will expose itself. Goodbye. And now the person is aware, oh, now that I have to, work on this wound with the Lord and we're healing this wound, we're closing that door. That means this person can't enter in. So you can't white knuckle it. Okay. Meaning you can't just be like, okay, it's just going to be willpower. If there is a spiritual reason, if there is trauma associated with the reason why you eat the way that you eat and how much you eat, and even the kind of food that you eat, whether it's generational, whether it's cultural, or whether it's trauma related, you need to figure out which one is which. Because once you know the root, you could deal with the fruit. See, I am not about dealing with the fruit. I like to come with an axe. This is me in the spirit. I come with an axe. I walk in and I'm like, okay. But I come with the oil. So I'm always gentle. People don't know I come with the axe, but I come with it. And I look at the root and I'm like, there it is. Boom. Like a spiritual surgeon. Boom. Hacking the root. The person doesn't even hurt. I just know where to go and I will know what to uproot so there could be a faster, easier way of dealing. Now, sometimes trauma can take time to heal, and that's okay. And sometimes it takes sessions, not just with inner healing and deliverance, but sometimes it takes sessions with a counselor. And listen to me, I am all about trauma counselors. And I'm talking about not lay people, I'm talking about certified trauma specialists. I believe that we need to do that. We need to combine that. We need to combine that with inner healing and deliverance therapy to work through some issues are not going to be taken care of in 3 sessions, okay? And so the spiritual side is taken care of, right? The the spiritual side has been uplifted, but sometimes the making sure that you don't go back to your own vomit, making sure that you don't return to that thing or that you leave the door open, you have to learn how to fill your house with other things, and therapy could teach you other coping mechanisms to do that. You see, this is wisdom speaking here. This is the Lord speaking here. We have to have wisdom, especially when we're talking about trauma. We don't condemn people. So we have to approach these behaviors, guys, with empathy and understanding. If somebody is using food as a trauma response, please understand that it's important not just to seek help from, pastors and inner healing and deliverance ministers, but also mental health professionals, therapists, counselors. That could be crucial in addressing underlying trauma and developing healthier coping mechanisms. Now, what I want to discuss with you next week is I want to discuss with you 2 things. I'm going to give you the ways to combat gluttony, and then we are going to break it off. We are going to have a deliverance session where we pray and do declarations, where we minister. So that's next week. You are not going to want to miss next Wednesday, because I want to talk to you about ways to combat. Now that we understand it, ask yourself this question. If you struggle with food, if you struggle with food or with gluttony or with any of these things, I want you to ask yourself why. What is the root? Or if you struggle with overindulging in even just one treat, that's still a gluttonous behavior. Why? Where does it come from? And I want you to examine that, because next week we're going to talk about ways to combat it. But we're also going to talk about to declare and decree and do some deliverance and do some inner healing to get some of that out. But listen, therapy is important. That is absolutely right, Dr. Gore, 100%. Therapy does teach coping skills, which is why I'm a strong proponent of both. And people always say, oh, you don't need that. People don't need that. And I'm like, please don't be foolish. Like, please don't be those people, okay? Because, there's inner healing and there's deliverance, but there's also therapy. And those are wonderful, wonderful, important ways of healing as well. And when we pretend that it's not necessary, we're only being foolish. We sound foolish sometimes when we're like, oh no, we don't need that. Sometimes people need therapy, the things that they have gone through, and there's nothing wrong with that. Okay. So I want to encourage you to examine your heart. So, Father, just reveal right now to those watching now and later Is there something in our lives? Is there a specific treat? Is there something in our lives that we binge on? It could even be television. Is there a way that we use food as comfort instead of you, God? If there is, reveal to us what it is. Reveal to us what it is so we can come next week prepared to break off some of this stuff, to break off some of these things that maybe we didn't know we had. Amen. All right, guys. I love you so much. And I definitely want you to come back here because I want you to come back next week live. We will be ministering next week. And if you have any questions, please email me at thebridalcallministries@gmail.com. We are a safe place for your questions, your comments, your connections. And please know that you're loved. This is not condemnation. Amen. All right. All right, guys, until next week, I will see you then. Share the broadcast because others need to know and get delivered. In Jesus' name, see you next week. And I just want to share, I am a monthly partner at DominionTV, and I do this specifically because it is excellent soil. And I know that every seed I sow every month goes towards ministering the gospel to the nations. And this is kingdom reality. This is what needs to be done in kingdom. And when you see good soil, you should be sowing into it too. So I want to encourage you to sow into great soil and reach nations. Maybe you're not called to go to a nation, but do you know you can go to the nation with your seed? There are people that have never heard the name of God. There are people that die for their faith every day in other countries. And when you support DominionTV, you're making a way. You are making a path in the wilderness to deliver the gospel and establish the kingdom of heaven where they are. And every seed you sow goes towards establishing the kingdom of heaven on earth in these various nations where they may never hear the name of God, or they may have to hide scripture in their pockets and share it. We are so blessed. It's time